Right, here we have probably one of the easier 1 mark multiple choice questions. It's asking you which one of the following best expresses the religious ideal that there should be no violence in the world. It's quite a wordy question, but really it's quite straightforward. It's just saying which one of these says that there should be no violence in the world. Is it defense, justice, peace, or terrorism? Obviously you're just going to write C, peace, and then get 1 mark and then quickly move on to the next question. It's one of the easier ones, so you'll often get those. One quick tip though that has a bearing on your exam: when you open your exam paper, don't just, because you get an option of which questions to choose, if you've studied more than 4 topics, then you don't have to do all 6 topics. You only need to do 4. So if you are choosing, don't let an easy 1 marker like this one make you do this question, because you should check the 4, 5 and 12 markers first. Make sure that you can do those, especially the 12 marker. If it's something really tricky, then you should take more notice of that one, because obviously it's worth more marks before you commit to doing that question. All right, it can be tempting to see an easy one like this and think, right, I'm definitely going to do this war unit, but yeah, it might not be the best choice. So check all the questions first, right? Rightio, here we have such an easy question. I love ones like this. All you've got to do is give 2 ways in which religious believers can help victims of war. So it's a give to question. You don't even have to explain these ways. You just have to say or write down 2 ways in which religious believers can help victims of war. It's really straightforward. Just think of any 2 ways. It could be anything. So I've just written, give them basic provisions like food and shelter, and then try to create a peaceful environment for them. That's how they can help victims of war. You could write anything, give them asylum, help them to find their lost loved ones, or, literally anything that would help a victim of war. You can write there and get 2 out of 2. Okay, straightforward, no bother. Right, so we're well into the war topic now, or peace and conflict topic. This question is a 4 marker. It says, explain 2 contrasting beliefs in contemporary British society about weapons of mass destruction. In your answer, you should refer to the main religious tradition of Great Britain and 1 or more other religious traditions. So if you're up to date or revised with all your key terms, hopefully you'll remember weapons of mass destruction involve things like chemical weapons, biological weapons, and nuclear weapons in the spec, and those are all weapons that can cause huge amounts of death and destruction, and overall most people would think they're probably bad things. But anyway, you've still got to come up with contrasting beliefs, which means they've just got to be 2 different ways of thinking about weapons of mass destruction. And well, that just means you have to write about 2 different ways and elaborate and expand your answers on both of them. So firstly, I'm going to say that 1 belief is that weapons of mass destruction are never justified, as God has created all life, and Jesus said that you ought to love both your neighbour and your enemy as yourself, which doesn't involve destroying them. So it's quite a straightforward point there about God created all life and life is valuable, love other people. So that's a negative view of weapons of mass destruction. And then I'll start a new line and say another way of looking at it is to consider that weapons of mass destruction can keep the peace. So countries with the most powerful arsenal of WMDs can act as peacekeepers. And Jesus said that blessed are the peacemakers. And so that way is the positive side of weapons of mass destruction. So 2 points. It can't be justified because of God's creation, and then development of that, and then saying that they actually can be used to keep peace. And why Jesus said that was a good thing. So two quick points. Elaboration of both should equal 4 marks for you. Okay, this one could crop up. This question could crop up either in the crime unit or in the peace and conflict unit. So in this instance, it's in the peace and conflict unit, and it says explain 2 religious beliefs about forgiveness, and it is worth 5 marks. And you've got to refer to sacred writings or another source of religious belief and teaching in your answer. And it's an explain 2 question, so you've got to say 2 or write 2 religious beliefs about forgiveness and elaborate on each one. And with these 5 markers, it's always handy to try and get some sort of quote or teaching from scripture in there to support your response, to make sure you get that 5th mark for the religious content. So firstly, hopefully you sort of understand what forgiveness is. It's actually quite a hard concept to define. Whenever I say to my students, right, what's forgiveness? They often say, well, it's when you forgive someone. But so it's quite a tricky concept to get your head around. But I'd sort of summarize it as showing grace and mercy towards someone who's wronged you, and an attempt to sort of move on from what they've done, and from that point you can then either rebuild the relationship or let go of sort of feelings of hatred and anger towards that person. It's quite a tough term to get your head around. Anyway, so what do religious people believe about forgiveness is what we want to know here. So I'm just going to write 2 things and expand on each. So the first thing is that one belief is it is an ideal. It should be striven for. All Christians should aim for it. Jesus taught that God was forgiving and that you should forgive 70 times 7 times if somebody wrongs you. It's pretty radical at the time. People were trying to catch Jesus out and say, well, how many times should we forgive? 7 times? They were sort of being a bit sarcastic with him, saying that 7 was a lot of times to forgive someone. And he went full on forgiveness mode and said, no, 70 times 7. So, yeah, it's quite a famous teaching, that one. Then start a new line and say another one. Another teaching is that Hindus believe that being forgiving will help you to develop good karma. So forgiving benefits others at man and will help them achieve moksha. And I should say it helped you achieve moksha as well. So we've got 1 point there that it's an ideal that everyone should go for, and development of a religious teaching. And then another point there, and again saying how it helps them is the development. And an examiner will hopefully say, right, there's 2 developed reasons there, and there's a religious teaching in there too. So that will hopefully get you 5 out of 5 points. So we're on to the final essay question now about the peace and conflict unit. And it's a really short statement. War is never right. And you've got to evaluate that statement. This is a 12-mark essay. So to evaluate, you should give reasoned arguments to support the statement, war is never right, and explain fully with logical chains of reasoning why somebody might think that. Then you've got to give reasoned arguments to support a different point of view. And you should refer to religious arguments in this, because with questions like this, there's no religious element built into the question. So you need to make sure that you put some religious points in there, or you won't get above 6 out of 12. And then reach a justified conclusion. Okay, so my tip for these, as you probably know, is write as much as you can to agree with why war is never right. Should be quite straightforward in this case, and make sure you've got about 4 or 5 good points that lead on and argue persuasively why war is never right. I'm going to start doing that now. I agree. War is never right because it causes obvious and devastating consequences for all people involved. Firstly, the huge death tolls from war are against the sanctity of life. This is the idea that life is created by God and deserves respect. Usually it is the poor and vulnerable who get dragged into wars, while wealthy businesses like arms companies rake in huge profits. Jesus is widely believed by Christians to have been a pacifist, which means that he would be against violence. Jesus said that you should turn the other cheek, meaning do not fight back against evil with violence. His refusal to attack those who were aggressive towards him is often used as a reason why Christians should always be peaceful. Again, you could go on there and really sort of write more. I've seen students write, paragraphs and paragraphs on some of these essays, but as long as you've developed a paragraph there with a few good points, then you have give reasoned arguments to support the statement. Leave a line and then argue the opposite. Sometimes war might be right. So have that in your mind and try and develop some arguments on that side. I'm going to say, however, many Christians might be in favour of some wars if they are in line with the just war principles. These state that a war can be fought for the good of the world. If the war has a clear purpose and the good gained outweighs the costs, then maybe God would approve of the good intentions. Also, if the war is conducted in the right way, avoiding as much evil as possible, then perhaps it will be the lesser of two evils. Sometimes showing love for your neighbours may involve defending them against evil tyrants and dictators. Often going to war is a tough decision, and it's not taken lightly. So even if it is the wrong call, it might still be right in some ways. So I've sort of just tried to open up the grey area there and say, actually, you can't just say that something's never right, because there might be some reasons why it is right. Then I conclude, leave another line and say something like, to conclude, saying war is never right is just too simplistic and doesn't really do justice to some of the more noble reasons to want to fight injustice and evil. So you can see here that the paragraph 4 has a good few points there about why war is bad, and gone into the sort of negative side of it and why it is never right, and then some clear positives, well, not even positives really, but just points which demonstrate that war might sometimes be the best way out of a bad situation. So again, check you've got some good points for, some good points against. Make sure you've got a conclusion, and double check on these ones that you've included some religious ideas in there. As an examiner marking these, I would see that they've said agree at the top of that paragraph. However, at the top of that paragraph, I can already scan my eyes over it and see that there's religious ideas in there. So I'll already be thinking that this is shaping up to be a 12 before starting to read it. And if you can sow the seeds in the examiner's mind that your answer is a good one from the beginning, then hopefully they've just got to then read it to check that it matches up to that. So, you'll hopefully be heading for a top level answer if you follow these tips.